Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, and I'm your host. And we have a very interesting show tonight when we're going to start out with Virginia politics in Richmond. And specifically, we're going to be talking to Delegate Marcus Simon. He represents the 53rd District, and that is the City of Falls Church and parts of Fairfax. And he is coming to us via Skype because, of course, he is down there diligently representing the interests of his constituents. So I want to say thank you very much, Marcus, for coming. I appreciate you taking the time out from your schedule.
Well, thanks, Bettina. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm glad to be able to do this.
So I think most of our viewers know what crossover is. It just happened down there, but why don't you tell for the newcomers, what is crossover?
Sure. So in Virginia, we're a part-time legislature, so we only meet in session for 60 days a year during the long year and 45 days during the short year. So 2016 is a long year because we consider the budget, and we give ourselves half the session roughly for each house. So at about the halfway point, the House of Delegates, which I serve in, has to finish consideration of all of its bills and send them down the hall to the State Senate. The State Senate has the same deadline to finish work on all of their bills, and then they cross over. Since we're sending them figuratively, sending them down the hall, that's the date that everything has to cross over and make its way to the other house.
So what survived? I know there are a lot of bills that get introduced that never make it out of committee, but what are some of the important ones, particularly to your constituents or to Virginia in general, that actually made it through crossover?
Well, there's sort of three categories of bills that made it through crossover, the way I like to think of it. There's some good bills, some bad bills, and then some sort of ugly compromises that got through, because sometimes compromise doesn't look pretty. So some of the good bills that got through this session had to do with sort of good government types of things and helping move things along. For instance, we've got legislation going forward to regulate Airbnb, which is it's a new industry, it's a new technology that didn't exist before. So we're going to figure out how that fits in with Virginia, with our hotel industry, with our travel and tourism, with our local zoning ordinances and things like that. So that's on its way over to the Senate to be considered and get the final touches put on it. We had legislation sort of in the same realm that I put in to regulate daily sports fantasy sites. These are sites like DraftKings and FanDuel, where people can go on and set up teams and hopefully win prizes, sometimes cash prizes, for having a good lineup or a good team. So there's some question in a lot of states is that gambling.
Right.
What kind of rules do you have to make sure it's not gambling? Who should be allowed to play, and so forth. So we've got a bill that actually just crossed over as well to regulate that. So those are some of the types of things that aren't terribly controversial. They're pretty bipartisan, but they need to be done because things that didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago, we couldn't have regulated.
Well, and how does that work? Because, as you say, they didn't exist a number of years ago, and the state regulatory apparatus, business people are always concerned that type of thing is going to quash any kind of innovation. How do you balance that? Are you just having somebody, giving it to some agency in the government and say, go figure out what to do with Airbnb?
Well, usually these things actually are done cooperatively with the industry. In the case of DraftKings and FanDuel, for instance, they came to the legislature and said, hey, we want to be regulated. We want to work within your rules. We want to talk to your, in Virginia, we have a Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services that'll work with them on figuring out what the rules should be. So usually it's a cooperative exercise. It's funny, we hear a lot of people talking about, on the other side of the aisle in particular, businesses wanting less regulation.
Right.
My experience is that businesses want predictability. They want to have regulation so that they know what the rules are, what rules they have to work within, and they don't have any surprises. So that's sort of how those things work. Same thing with Airbnb. Last year, we did the same thing with Uber and Lyft, with these transportation network companies. They came to us and said, hey, let's come up with a common sense set of regulations that'll level the playing field, make sure everybody does business the right way, and helps really protect their business model, because people have more confidence. Consumers have more confidence if they know that the government's got a little bit of a hand on it and is regulating to prevent some of the worst practices that might come out.
Right.
Of some.
Well, is there any concern down there? I don't know if you saw the story about Uber today, since you mentioned it, with the driver who killed all of those people. Fortunately, none of the Uber customers, but still. Is there any sort of reaction to that somehow different types of regulations are needed?
Nothing yet. It's funny, folks on the other side of the aisle in particular don't like to talk about gun violence too close to a tragedy. Right?
Sure.
We always hear, this is not the time to have that conversation. That's fairly new and fairly raw, so we haven't had much talk about that yet. But I do think it's something that needs to be considered, and I think the bigger issue is also just the availability of firearms for all kinds of people.
Well, you had a number of firearm bills that you put in this year. They sort of met the standard fate, which was they didn't get very far. But I noticed one of them, which I thought was kind of curious, had to deal with people not being able to get weapons or concealed permits if they were on the federal terrorist watch database. Which my question on that was, I keep hearing that the people, you don't know if you're on it, you can't get yourself off of it, it's not very reliable. Is there some fix going on with the database that makes it something you'd actually want to rely on?
Well, yeah, that's the objection that we heard. And I actually took two stabs at that particular one, and one's in committee, and then one's with a floor amendment that the speaker ruled out of order. But the objection you get is that the database itself is maintained by the FBI and Homeland Security and various agencies, and nobody knows exactly how you get on it and what's necessary to get yourself off of it. And then the other concern, I guess, is that the law enforcement agencies don't want people being told sometimes that they're on the watch list. Right. And so the concern was, hey, somebody goes to apply for a concealed weapons permit and they're on the watch list, you have to deny their permit, but you don't get to tell them why, because you've been asked, don't tip them off that they're being watched.
Oh, yeah.
So those are some of the concerns. My view on that is, I think those are the rarer cases. For me, my sort of bottom line is, if the person's too dangerous to sit next to me on an airplane, they're probably too dangerous to be walking around carrying a concealed weapon. You have those same issues with air travel, and they are able to be overcome there. People have a chance to appeal. People have a chance to talk to the agencies and find out, hey, you've got the wrong name. I'm just Adam Smith. There's lots of Smiths around. Right. If we can do it for the airline industry and air travel, I think we can do it for firearms.
Well, while we're speaking of weapons, let's talk a little bit about that compromise that Terry McAuliffe negotiated, having to do with protective orders and concealed permits. I know that you also had a bill in on that.
Sure, and that's one of those what I call the ugly, right, under that good, bad, the ugly category, because when you put these things together, it doesn't always come out pretty. And we've got a lot of folks on my side of the issue really pretty unhappy with the governor. I'm not breaking any news here. I mean, they put out full-page ads in the Richmond Times-Dispatch being very critical of him. But let's talk a little bit about what the compromise is. So there's three bills that are involved. The first bill, the big piece of it that's controversial, is a bill to create universal reciprocity for concealed carry permit. Sort of like treat them like a driver's license. If I can get a driver's license in Virginia, I can drive a car in any of the 50 United States. They want a concealed carry permit to work the same way. You get a concealed carry permit here, you can use it in every other state, and that about 30 states do the same for anybody who recognizes their permits. And so folks can take their firearms and keep them concealed and go from Virginia and drive down to Orlando to Disney World and keep their gun concealed the whole time. That's a big goal of firearms enthusiasts that they've been after for a long time in Virginia and haven't been able to get. We made it even more difficult, about 3 months ago when the Attorney General actually reviewed all these states that we have reciprocity with and said, hey, these guys' standards are too low. Let's take the driver's license analogy. Hey, these guys aren't requiring a behind-the-wheel test. Right. They're not requiring anybody to demonstrate competency with a car, in our case, a handgun. They're just too dangerous. So they give them to anybody. They give them to people with felonies. They give them to people with domestic abuse convictions. We got to cancel our reciprocity agreement.
Well, that was the state law. I mean, they're always talking, the people who are anti-more gun control always say, just enforce the laws that are on the books. And when I read that, it was like, well, that's what the Attorney General is trying to do.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think they initially reacted kind of the knee-jerk, this is executive overreach, you can't do this is wrong. Right. And then when they slowed down and read the law, they realized he was onto something, and they really kind of had them. And so that's what brought them to the bargaining table. When they realized that the Attorney General was right, he was acting within the law, that they were going to have a tough time carrying their concealed weapons out of state, they came to the bargaining table. And initially they offered what I would call the second bill in this compromise, which is optional background check. It doesn't sound like much, but it's the fact is, in Virginia currently, the state police cannot do a background check for someone other than a licensed federal firearms dealer. So if I'm a private seller at a gun show, and I go to the state police booth, I say, hey, you guys check out to this buyer, you check him out for me. State police would say, no, we can't do that. You're not allowed to have access to our database.
Right.
So this bill will allow private sellers who aren't federally licensed dealers at gun shows to have access to that database to be able to do voluntary background. It's also going to ensure that there is a state police presence at every gun show in Virginia, which hasn't always been the case. So there's somebody there to ask, somebody to supervise the transaction. The third bill, that was their initial offer. The governor said that's not even close to enough for what you guys are asking. So the third bill is one that I put in, something similar to what I put in my first bill ever. We talked about this on your show before I went down to Richmond for the first time a couple years ago. Bill that says, hey, if you've been convicted of domestic violence offenses, you can't carry a firearm. And what this one does is sort of more related to protective orders. It says, if you are under a protective order currently, you can't purchase a gun, you can't transport a gun, and now it adds to that, you may not possess a firearm while you're subject to a permanent protective order. Let me say that again slowly. You cannot possess a firearm while you're subject to a permanent protective order. And that's where some of the criticism comes in. Some people feel like that's too narrow a category.
Right, it's too late in the process type thing.
Too late. Why doesn't it apply to emergency protective orders and temporary restraining orders and all these other types of protective orders that we have in Virginia? Even those few days that it takes to get a permanent protective order a week, that's when a lot of the really bad things happen.
That's right.
So some people thought that the governor should have held out for a better deal and had it apply to all protective orders across the board, even these emergency and temporary protective orders. The gun rights folks said, well, you can't do that because there's no due process. You can take away somebody's gun, and that can be done on just a one-sided sworn affidavit from somebody,
right.
And I don't feel like there's enough due process in that process.
Well, Marcus, we're going to pause right here and go to break, and then we'll come back and pick up our conversation.
Okay.
Stay with us.
Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals and the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water.
At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site.
That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff.
You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, and I'm your host, and we are talking with Delegate Marcus Simon, coming to us via Skype from his offices in Richmond. And when we went to break, we were talking about the governor's compromise with the gun rights people versus protective orders, and I wanted to pick up that conversation, Marcus, and finish it off. So the law applies to people who are subjected to permanent protective orders.
Yeah, that's right. And so, again, that it will apply to a good number of situations, but for some of those emergency protective orders, those temporary restraining orders, those real, right off the bat, very intense situations where they're often dangerous, this wouldn't apply yet. And again, the reason being that the gun rights folks thought that those are sometimes too easy to get. There's not enough due process. The gun owner and the subject of the protective order hasn't yet had a chance to come in and give their side of the story.
Okay. So from your perspective, is this a good compromise or not?
Well, it's hard to be a Monday morning quarterback, as it were. And I wasn't in the room, to be honest, when the deal was negotiated. Would I have liked to have held out for more? I think we probably should have, but without actually being in the room and knowing what was offered, it's hard to second guess the governor on something like this, and not always smart when I still have bills that he needs to sign. So
that would be true too. That would be true. Well, let's talk about some other things then. So what are the other bad ones? You had the good, the bad, the ugly. So
some of the bad bills that passed, it's sort of good and bad. I mean, there's some bad bills that passed, and I'm happy to be able to tell you that we now have 34 members in the Virginia House of Delegates, which doesn't sound like a lot in a 100-member House, but it is just enough to sustain a governor's veto. So some of the bills that passed, I think I'm fairly confident the governor will veto and won't become the law, but they're troublesome nonetheless. One of those was a bill that's labeled by its proponents as a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or a Religious Freedom Government Non-Discrimination Act. In fact, those of us on the other side are calling this a license to discriminate bill. And what it does is it protects 3 particular religious beliefs from any kind of adverse government action. So if you're an organization that says we believe that marriage is only between a man and a woman, we don't recognize the same-sex union. We believe that people are only the gender that they were born with. Essentially, we don't believe that there's any such thing as transgenderism. And if we believe that sexual relations should only happen inside a marriage between a man and a woman, those 3 core beliefs, if you hold those, you can't suffer any loss of funding, loss of any benefit, loss of tax status, loss of government contracts, and so forth for having those beliefs. So what it does essentially is says you can't have a non-discrimination policy that includes sexual orientation, gender identity, or protection for people in same-sex marriages, and enforce that, because they're entitled to have that belief and express it and not lose anything as far as the government benefit goes. So I objected to it on the floor. I said, this sounds to me a lot like we're establishing a state religion.
Right.
We're saying there's these 3 particular beliefs that we're going to elevate above all others and give these beliefs, these religious beliefs, special status.
Well, I saw that coming through and thought we are institutionalizing, we are legitimizing this kind of discrimination. And unfortunately, Virginia has a long history of being the last one to the party on progressive beliefs. And it can't help us in attracting employers or people here to go against what is becoming the prevailing view.
Right, and that's right. That's the other problem with passing a bill like this, even out of the House. Even knowing that the governor is going to veto it, it won't become the law. We've already sort of suffered the bad publicity. I mean, there have been headlines. My Facebook page is blown up with people saying, "What are you guys doing in Virginia?" Right. It's already beginning to harm our reputation as a place that is welcoming and a place that you want to do business, particularly to lure the kind of jobs and workers that we need to fill those jobs to Virginia. Young millennials really are a different page on this issue. They don't understand what the big deal is.
That's right.
They don't understand why we would do something like this. So, one of the big problems we have in Virginia as far as diversifying our economy goes isn't that we don't have a lot of good tech companies, but we have actually more jobs that we can fill with good tech workers. And these companies are going to leave if they can't fill those jobs.
Right.
So this kind of bill and this kind of legislation sends exactly the wrong signal.
Exactly right. Well, let's talk about some other things. What are some of the other bills? And then I'm going to talk to you about ethics, because you put in a lot of ethics bills. They didn't fare well, but so what's going on with the ethics down there? I keep reading that the legislator is trying to broaden back out what you all can take as gifts, what you're allowed to do. It's kind of like everybody forgot about all of the controversy a few years ago with Bob McDonnell. And so, what are you guys doing down there? I mean, should I run for the House of Delegates? Because it sounds like y'all are getting a great deal.
Well, I suspect that some of what you're saying is right. Is that people maybe think, hey, maybe we're far enough away from this scandal that we can start to sneak back in some of the little perks and the things that we like to have. Senator Dick Black was quoted in the paper as saying that not being able to have a steak dinner on the tab of a lobbyist really demeans us. It's demeaning to us as legislators, which is just so far out of whack. Like a lot of the things the senator says. But we have sort of a trifecta of problems as far as I can tell on ethics, and in particular on campaign finance. And that's where I've sort of tried to focus. Let me talk about ethics first, then I'll talk about campaign finance. On the ethics bill, I wanted to we have established an ethics council here in Virginia in the wake of the McDonnell scandal, but we didn't give them investigatory authority or the ability to audit anybody's disclosure. So now we have a new ethics council, which I have to submit my disclosures to, but after I send it in, nobody reads it. As we found out the other day, when it turned out that Tommy Norman, the Senate Majority Leader, left out $500,000 in stock holdings on his report, and he had to disclose that himself when he realized the mistake. Nobody realized that was all missing. So I had a bill that would have given them the ability to audit a random number, a small random sample of returns or disclosures, because like our tax system. Most of the reason we're so careful with our taxes is because we're afraid of an audit, right? And so it requires us to be more careful, more thorough, more diligent. The other thing I did is I had a bill in to to give it investigative authority. Say, hey, listen, if somebody says, hey, Marcus Simon is doing something funky ethically, I don't think he's accurately disclosing in his reports what he's really doing, the Ethics Council would have the ability to go find out, hey, let's follow up on that, let's see what's really going on. Those two particular bills were laid on the table. It's a nice way of saying we killed them, because the House of Delegates is not interested in going there right now. Two bills that got a better reception were one that would have required us to report bundled gifts. So one of the things we did is we limited the amount of a gift that we can get to $100. But one of the ways that lobbyists work around that is they say, well, I've got 4 clients. So I've got 4 clients that'll each give you $25 each towards tonight's dinner. And so here's a $100 gift, but you don't have to report it. So I'm here on behalf of the shipbuilders, the Maritime Administration, the company X and company Y. They're all clients, and they all are going to pitch in a fourth of the dinner. Right. So I've got a bill in that says we can't do that. The committee liked that. They recognize that that's a problem, but they didn't like the way I solved it. So sometimes when that happens in a short session, that gets carried over for a year so we can work on getting the words just right. Okay. And then the other bill I had in that's going to be carried over is a bill to require you to report tax credits that you receive. A lawyer, I have to report any clients that have business before the General Assembly because of the conflict of interest. I think people that benefit from certain tax credits, say you're in the filmmaking industry, you benefit from the film and tax credit. That's fine that you do that, but you ought to disclose to people that you're doing it. So when it comes up for a vote, hey, should we extend this tax credit? Should we increase it? You should be abstaining from those votes because you've got a personal interest in it. And there's no way to do that if we don't have them disclose from the beginning that they take advantage of the credit. Okay. So those bills will probably come back in 2017. On campaign finance, we've got a big problem. We just do. The fact is that we have corporations with business before this body that we regulate, I talked about it a little earlier, that essentially fund almost 100% of certain people's campaigns. And then the third, worse than that, is there's no limits on how they spend that money. So what I wanted to do is 2 things. One, say corporations can't make contributions. If they want to form a political action committee and you can disclose who the donors are and it's subject to a little bit of regulation, that's one thing. But a corporation can't write campaign checks. That's the same as in the federal system. And 2, you can't use your campaign account as a personal checking account. Right. We don't have any opponents. When we're given, we raise $150,000 from corporate interests, and there's nothing else to spend the money on. We ought not be able to just spend it on ourselves on steak dinners and hotel stays and trips to California, which are some of the things that we've seen happen.
Right.
The bill on corporate contributions was killed quickly. The bill on personal use of campaign expenses, however, has survived to be carried over. Once again, we're going to try and study that and make sure we get those words just right.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it may take another scandal before we get folks embarrassed enough to start to act on it.
Well, that may be. Well, let me take the last 2 minutes that we have, because there was an issue that came up on proffers that I know really upset particularly the people on the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. So in the last 2 minutes that we've got, tell me about that. What happened?
So real quick, a proffer is a system where developers can say, listen, I will offer to improve the infrastructure in exchange for you allowing me to build a more dense project. I realize my project's going to put more kids in schools, it's going to have more people using the library, more people on the roads. So I'll build an extra lane, I'll build you an extra library, I'll build a school for you if you let me build this project. That's been, in some localities, they've taken that concept and turned it into a cash proffer system. Whereas it's basically, look, you're going to pay me $35,000, $40,000 for every new unit you want to build. Not the things, I just want the money. The developers have objected to that. They said, no, we'll buy you the things. We don't want to just give you the money. So the bill is to sort of outlaw proffers altogether. Well, that's a bad idea. In Fairfax, we use them very effectively to develop Tyson's Corner, the Mosaic District, the Maryfield, where I represent, along the Silver Line. All that stuff has been proffered by developers in a really cooperative way. The result is I voted no on the proffer bill before crossover. When it comes back to us, though, it looks like as a result of all those no votes we put up, we're going to get a lot of concessions from the development community to protect the proffer system that works really well for cities like places like the City of Falls Church in Fairfax County and Tyson. So at the end, we may get a bill that we can vote for, but it's going to be a much better bill than the one we started with. That started with us having to say no, 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 and get them to come to the table and work with them.
All right. Well, hopefully that'll work out on the next side through, because we did hear a lot about that up here in Fairfax. And I want to, because we've got like 40 seconds left, so if you've got 2-sentence last message, go for it. Otherwise, we'll take us out to break.
Well, you know, it's been great to have a veto-proof majority. There's a number of really bad bills that died because Republicans knew there was no chance and they didn't want to embarrass themselves. We had a bathroom bill that said that people had to have their gender checked before they could go to the bathroom.
I know. All right. I've got to stop you there because we are about to cut you off and go to station identification. Thank you all for staying with us. Stay with us. We're going to be back.
This year, 28,000 Americans will be diagnosed with oral cancer. Every year, 7,000 Americans die of oral cancer.
I'm Eva Cohen, and I'm an oral cancer survivor. I didn't fit the profile. I didn't smoke or drink. I had no family history of cancer. No family history of cancer.
I was able to do it. I haven't felt 2 seconds.
31 years old. I went to see my dentist about a sore in my mouth that wouldn't heal. It was oral cancer. I had to have a radical neck dissection and a portion of my tongue reconstructed. I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
I'm Surgeon General Richard Carmona. The survival rate for oral cancer is only 50%. Oral cancer can happen to anyone. If you have a sore or lesion in your mouth that doesn't heal within 2 weeks, see your dentist. Early detection is the key.
Early detection saves lives. I know.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty. But one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
2 words for you. Pop quiz. Ready? Name any funny movie. A drama. Name a mystery. And one more thing. Name the movie your kids saw today in science class.
Know what really matters. Know about your kid's school and know about your kid. Find out 100 ways to know more, do more.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton. I'm your host. And we had just started discussing the proffer situation with Delegate Marcus Simon when we had to take our station identification break. So we are back, and we are going to pick that conversation up because it is something that is very important to those of us who live in specifically Northern Virginia. So let's go back to where you were. You think you're going to get some kind of a compromise? So is the compromise going to be no cash proffers, but the kind of proffers that Fairfax has always done for the street lights and the road expansions and those kinds of things?
Yeah, that's basically it. And we're also going to exempt certain areas of Fairfax County. So there's an exemption, for instance, for places within a certain vicinity of a metro station. So that's going to protect the Silver Line. So they won't be affected by the new bill at all. Localities adjacent to metro stations, so that's going to protect the City of Falls Church. One of the really controversial pieces of this that was in the bill initially said there could be no what they call architectural profit, because what was happening in one particular county in Virginia was the Board of Supervisors there was essentially, as far as the builders tell it anyway, micromanaging all the finish details down to, hey, we want the houses to have granite countertops, brushed nickel finish, and things like that. What they're trying to get at is they wanted high-end homes. They wanted to do that through the proffer system. And the developers said, wait, that's our job. You have to market houses and design it. You guys give us density and things like that. The problem was that language was really broad because no architectural proffer. Sometimes you do want things as far as the appearance, the density of the buildings, how close they can be to the street. So you want certain flexibility to say, hey, tell me a little bit more about what this project is going to look like before I approve it. That would be a proffer. Well, hey, we promise if it makes you feel better, we'll make sure that it's back from the sidewalk or it's close to the sidewalk if that's what you want. So we took out that language that said no architectural proffers at all. So those are allowed now. We got a letter from the locality that was doing the really bad stuff saying we promise we won't do it anymore. We'll see how that goes. We also exempted what we call small comprehensive area plan. So
what are those?
So in a lot of localities that are much smaller than Fairfax, you have one comprehensive plan for the whole county. Okay. In Fairfax, we're so big that we have many comprehensive plans. So we have a plan for Tyson's Corner, for instance. We have a plan for Maryfield. We have a plan for Springfield, the old Springfield Mall site. So those small area comprehensive plans or properties within those small area comprehensive plans are exempt from this bill. So a lot of the stuff that we were really worried about in Fairfax has been addressed. Now I know that there are folks on the Board of Supervisors that still don't like some of what's going on, and in particular just don't like the idea that the General Assembly is interfering with this process at all. They don't think that don't think that the state government ought to be involved in land use. That land use is a local purview completely. My point of view on this, though, is when we go to them and say, hey, your bill stinks. It does A, B, C, and D that we don't really like. And they come back to you and say, well, we fixed A, we fixed B, we fixed C, and now we fixed D. It's hard for me to then go back and say, well, I'm still not voting for your bill. Because then you start to lose credibility, and they don't want to come to you, they won't lobby you at all. And so you need to be flexible sometimes on these things. So this is, speaking of the good, the bad, and the ugly, this is another one of those sort of sausage-making processes where maybe nobody's going to be really happy with the final product, but I think we've taken out the worst elements of this bill. We've preserved something for the builders so that they can move forward, and the most abusive practices won't happen anymore. But we've protected, again, the locality's flexibility to use these important land use tools.
Well, how much is this actually going to apply to Fairfax County then if all of these different project areas got exempted? Because there's a lot of those. I mean, it's Tyson's, it's Maryfield, it's Springfield, the Seven Corners areas got some plan they're working on. Can people add plans? Is that a way to get around this, to just say, hey, I got another little area we're going to do, and then it doesn't apply?
You are a very smart person. You've got it exactly right. And that's, I mean, that's what Bill Thomas, who's a land use lawyer who works for these brothers, he said to me in my office this morning. He's like, look, here's your exception. If you don't like it, if there's an area you think you can't do what you need, create a small plan area, and you're out of the bill. So the localities can take themselves or a certain area out of the bill pretty easily now by creating one of these small area plans. And so you do a plan that way, they'll exempt you from the bill. And that was exactly how it was pitched to me as why it's sort of a reasonable compromise here. Now, it still does apply to things like big tracts of residential property. We still have some of that in Fairfax, although we're almost built out.
Yeah.
This is really targeted more at Loudoun and Prince William County, where there's still a lot of new housing development coming along, and where they feel like, the builders feel like, the counties are using these cash proffers as sort of an entrance tax. We don't want to raise our tax rate to pay for infrastructure. We'll just charge new residents coming in $35,000, $40,000, $45,000 per unit. The builders also argue that hurts fair housing, affordable housing, because they've got to start out with $40,000 on top. They've got to build a bigger, fancier house to get the margins that they need to be able to absorb that cost. So they're only building $500,000 and $600,000 houses as opposed to $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 homes because of what the proffers do. So,
well, and they lose control, as I understand the process. If they're giving the money, they don't get to say, and here's what this money has to go to, as opposed to if they're building a better entrance into their development or putting up a traffic light, there you've got an actual benefit to your own product. So it,
right. And that's right. And the other argument we heard, and I don't know the truth of all of this, but some of the counties are running fairly substantial balances in these proffer accounts. Wow. So that the money's building up in the accounts, and then the builders are saying, well, you're not spending it fast enough, or you're not really spending it. You're just using it as a fund to balance your books. So now the localities will tell you, well, look, sometimes we're saving up for big projects, and we need to wait till we have a critical amount of money in the account. So there's two sides to that story as well.
So does Fairfax lose anything in particular at this point, in your view, if this bill goes through, as it comes back?
Well, I don't think we've gotten to a point where the Board of Supervisors is going to embrace it and endorse it. Okay. And they are going to lose, again, some authority, and they don't like that. And I worked for Kate Hanley when she was chairman of the Board of Supervisors for 5-6 years. So I understand that. My instinct is let's not, interfere with the locality's business. If they don't like what a locality is doing, they can elect a new Board of Supervisors. We shouldn't be doing this from Richmond. At the same time, I think that given where we are in the process, we've gotten enough good stuff out of this bill. It's going to be something that some of us at Fairfax will support. Some of us probably won't. But it's probably going to become a law, so we better sort of get the most we can out of it.
And is the governor going to sign it? Was he a whole part of this negotiation to make it better?
Well, what's interesting about the powers of the governor in Virginia, unlike the president, is the governor has more than one choice. He doesn't just have to veto or sign the bill. He can also propose governor's amendment. So the lobbying on this bill will continue. Even if it gets out of both houses of the Senate, the action then moves over to the governor's mansion, where localities will probably want some more amendments, or the builders may want to try and get some amendments put in or taken out. So the governor's got a lot of options as to what he wants to do. I don't think he'll veto it outright, but he may have some more tweaks and things that he wants to do to make it work better.
So the saga will continue on the proffer bill until something actually happens with it.
That's right.
And we've got the parties actually working together on this. Is this one of those rare bipartisan bills?
Yeah, this one doesn't. This is the way things sort of used to be in Richmond when I was here 20-some years ago working for Jim Scott. This is more of a regional issue. This is where the people in urban areas versus rural areas don't much care about this too much.
Well, they don't have enough building.
But they do like to support the industry, which funds a lot of their campaigns. You've got inner suburbs, which are sort of already done, so it's not as big an issue for Arlington and Falls Church as it is, and even Fairfax for that matter, as it is with places like the exurbs, like Loudoun and Prince William. As we have some different interests. So the fixes that may help the city of Falls Church, for instance, the city of Falls Church got everything it asked for. It's fine with the bill. And so they've told me go ahead and support it. Fairfax is a little more lukewarm, and the folks in Loudoun and Prince William still hate it. So some of it's, as you radiate out from the core, is going to depend on how you feel, but it's less to do with party and much more to do with your geography and your constituency.
Okay. All right. So let me go back to one of your other bills, since we talked about this and we've still got a couple of minutes left, because I wanted to know what prompted the bill, because I saw the list that you did, and it had something to do with the removal of members of boards of supervisors, town councils, and school boards. And when I read it, I thought, something must be going on. I wonder what it is. So what was that all about? It was about clarifying signatures required or something. It was very interesting.
So let me put your mind at ease. I'm not after anybody. There's nobody that's in my sights. I'm not looking to recall anyone. What happened was somebody came to me with this, actually. A lot of these are generated by people that come to you with ideas. Somebody from a city that has a similar setup to Falls Church had been looking into this and said, the statute doesn't really work. In Virginia, frankly, this surprised me to know that we even had a recall procedure. Yeah. But you can recall an elected official if you get a petition signed by 10% of the people that voted for that office in the last election. So if somebody was elected with 100,000 votes, you get a petition of 10,000 voters, that's 10%, file that with the circuit court, and they can begin recall proceedings for that person. In cities like Falls Church and like Roanoke and like a lot of town councils, you vote for, like, say, your favorite 3 candidates. So what'll happen is that the math doesn't really work. 10% of the votes for that office is going to be a much higher number than it took to win that office. And again, I'm not after anybody in Falls Church, but as an example, there were about 9,000 votes cast for 3 spots on the Falls Church Council this last election. It only took about 2,600 to win because you could vote for up to 3. So there's really, nobody's interested in recalling anybody right now, but somebody from the State Board of Elections said, hey, we kind of need to fix this. We need to come up with a better formula for these multi-member elections. You're choosing 3. And I think the number that we want to use is 10% of the voters who participated in the election for that office, not the votes cast. But now there's a question as to whether we really keep that data. We know it, because some people will bullet. You have a choice of 3. I may vote for just 1. So the numbers aren't going to add up. You can't just take the numbers and divide by 3 because not everybody's going to use all 3 votes. So we track the number of voters. And then if there's a multi-office ballot, so say if you have an election, a town election in 2016, there's going to be a lot of people that come to vote for president that don't move down the ballot and vote in that city council or town council election.
Right.
So that's another one that was carried over because we know what the problem is. We just haven't yet figured out exactly the best way to fix it.
All right, well, I'm sure that all of those people on the boards of supervisors, town councils, and school boards are relieved to hear no one's in your sight. And I want to thank you for hanging out with us tonight. I know it took a lot of your time, but we got a lot of great information. So thanks so much, and have a great time down in the second half, down in Richmond.
I will do. We're going to go talk some budget stuff right now, so I'm sure we'll have more to talk about later.
All right, terrific. Thanks, Marcus.
Bye-bye.
Stay with us. We're going to be right back talking presidential elections.
I need a job.
Necesito trabajo. I would like to speak English better. Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
Por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
el Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
Capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals.
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
Are a small part of what we do.
son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
Para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia,
comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Hey, Lena, where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease, and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. get the whole story, talk to your doctor, and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, you might not know the half.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, and I'm your host. And on our last segment, we are very pleased to have Kris Balderston. He is an advisor to the campaign of Hillary Clinton for president. He has been with Secretary Clinton for the last 12 years. He started out as her very first legislative director in the Senate, ended up being a deputy chief of staff, went over to the State Department with her and did some excellent work over there. So he's going to talk to us. We've got a primary coming up on March 1st. You know, we've got that South Carolina one is getting in the way of all of our attention, but it's coming pretty fast next week. And so he's here to talk to us about what's going to be happening with the campaign in Virginia. And I want to thank you for taking time out.
Thank you,
and
Bettina.
coming to talk to us tonight.
Well, thank you. And you bring up a very good point. Not a lot of people know that there is a primary, presidential primary, on March 1st. Here a week from Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, in all of the Commonwealth of Virginia. We got to get people out and vote.
Well, the turnout is a big issue. Now, the folks in your opponent's campaign will say higher turnout benefits them, but do you really believe that?
No, I think we saw turnout in Nevada where it wasn't as great as it was in 2008, but turnout was pretty high. And I think in Virginia, I think in the states that are more diverse, and you know, there's a huge federal employee population here. I think turnout will be high, but again, a lot of people don't know about it, so I'm very appreciative of the fact that every opportunity we can get to get out and talk about this. You know, you're not going to see a lot of signs, you're not going to see a lot of, you know, other activities, so it's very important to get the word out, to get out there and, you know, do your research and talk to your friends about the campaign.
So when can we expect, because it is hard, and Virginia is a big state, to get the word out, and it's a very expensive media market, as I know you know. So how much are we going to be completely deluged with political ads as you try and get people ginned up to say, this is important, you need to come out?
Well, I think you are going to see some ads here, and I know from the Clinton campaign's point of view, every single night people are out there on the phones, getting our supporters ginned up and going out and canvassing. I spent the weekend canvassing in Northern Virginia, and people are very aware in Northern Virginia, at least, of what's going on. So, you know, we'll be out wherever people are this week, as I'm sure Bernie Sanders' campaign will be too. But very, very important to get out there and get the word out that this is a very key and critical time. The other thing I would just mention is you will see ads because Virginia is a very, very important state in the general election.
Suddenly we used to be ignored.
Right, exactly. I think the last Democrat to win Virginia before Obama did was Lyndon Johnson, and 1964. So this is a very competitive state, a purple state. So you're going to see a lot of activity throughout the end of the year. So beware of your telephones and your ads on TV. You're going to be saturated.
Well, we do have, and you mentioned it, a very diverse population. We've got 20% of our population thereabouts are African Americans. We've got another 9% who are Hispanic, another 6% who are Asians. And if you read the papers and sort of the commentators, they seem to think that Secretary Clinton would do better in a diverse population, that where Senator Sanders has won has been in the largely homogeneous places. I mean, New Hampshire, I read some statistic that said it's 95% white. You're now going in, the campaigns are going in, and Virginia is certainly right in there with all of our diversity, with a lot of states with a lot of diversity. Do you think that's going to help the Secretary?
Absolutely. I think we saw in Nevada this weekend where you had a very diverse state, large Latino population, large African American population, Secretary Clinton winning both of those groups in all of those precincts. So, but I think Hillary has a long history with the African American community from the time she went south with the Children's Defense Fund, with some of the stopping the segregated schools, tax credits that were happening. She went undercover. So she has a long, long history. And the other thing I would note, being a Northern Virginian, someone who worked with her at the State Department, you know, she celebrates, has always celebrated the diversity of our country. And you look at Northern Virginia and you travel around and it's, you see a lot of different diverse populations. In fact, we had a wonderful event this weekend celebrating Chinese New Year right here in Falls Church. So it's a celebration of why is America a very different country? It's because of its pluralism, its diversity, and I think she has always been out there promoting that. This, you know, diversity brings innovation and entrepreneurship. So I think this is something she strongly believes in and she wants to get out there and talk to people about.
Well, I know that she's had a very long history on women's rights and children. I mean, you mentioned the Children's Defense Fund, but she's also been very active in women's rights over the years. And one of the things that I found amazing, quite frankly, when she was Secretary of State, was the focus when she would travel around the world that she was putting on the women in those countries, the women education, the women small business initiatives. And it's really, I don't know that she gets a lot of credit for that, because again, the sort of pundits keep saying young women don't understand what she's done for them. How do you get that message out to say, this is somebody who has really had a long history of doing amazing things and creating an environment that says women are worthwhile, which you see when she goes to the places like in Africa where, you know, she's got the micro-lending things going on and that type of stuff. How does that message why isn't it getting out?
You know, it is remarkable, because I think the more, as we get into the campaign, into the more diverse states, I think you'll hear that message more. I mean, she famously made the statement in Beijing, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. I had the pleasure of traveling with her around the world. And I will tell you, there was not a single place we didn't go to where she didn't talk about women's rights. And often you'd be in a room with a foreign leader and they'd say, you know, we want to expand our economy. And Secretary Clinton would always turn to them and say, you want to expand your economy, give women, empower women, because it doubles your workforce and it doubles your market. And we saw, you know, I think one of the things that I'd like more people to know about, particularly our young people who are very innovative and into the disruptive economy, you know, when we went to Africa, Secretary Clinton, through the Global Partnership Initiative that I ran, would talk about, you know, cellular phones and empowering women who could then send their savings to a bank where it would be very safe and they could aggregate wealth, or being able to use a cell phone for agricultural purposes to know when to plant, or to use a cell phone for healthcare purposes. She was very open to really changing the way we thought of how to use the government. We called it 21st century diplomacy. And I mention this because I think there are a lot of federal workers, particularly here in Northern Virginia, who worked on these things, who had these ideas. These did not just come out of her head. They came from people who were in the federal government who had these ideas, very entrepreneurial and very dynamic. And I think this is a message we want to get across in Northern Virginia. We have a very, very, you know, at a time when people love bashing the federal government, this is we have a very, very honest, good government that we see from, you know, Norfolk, in the southern part of the state, all the way up here through Richmond and Northern Virginia. So it's very powerful to be able to talk about that more.
So what kind of proposals, because we do have a huge federal workforce, particularly up in Northern Virginia, but as you point out, in certain other spots in Virginia as well. Are there specific proposals that the Secretary has for federal employees? Because they've really taken it on the head lately.
Yeah, you know, I would urge people to go to the website on very specifics, but I do know that having worked for her for all of these years, leadership makes a difference. If you have a leader in the government who believes in the federal workers, who believes in their innovative nature, I think that could be a very powerful message to get out to the rest of the country. We need to be celebrating the hard work of our federal employees rather than bashing it.
Right. That's absolutely right. Let me ask you, we've got like 3 minutes left, and so I want to cover a couple of other things. But she was quite famous back in her husband's first term in trying to get universal health care. And of course it didn't work, and we've now got, many, many years later, Obamacare. But what are the ideas on improving this? I mean, people keep talking about, the Republicans always keep wanting to just get rid of it. And of course, her opponent is saying, I'm going to give everybody free health care. That's not really free because it's all going to be paid for with new taxes and things like that. But what is her plan? Is she going in the direction of more universal?
Yes, definitely going in the direction of more universal. In fact, in the 90s when she came to town, she famously had Hillary Care, which turned into Obamacare.
Yes.
But when she failed to get it passed in the Congress in the early 90s, what did she do? She went back at them. She was resilient. This is one of the things about Hillary Clinton that I think people have to recognize. And what did she do? She created the Children's Health Insurance Program that got 6 million more kids onto the healthcare rolls. And very, very important thing that she did. So as President Obama has created this Obamacare where we have many more people on with availability to health care, but there are still a lot out there that are not, and we have to, rather than start over again, I think we have to work very incrementally to get more and more of the people who are not on it to be on it. And a funny thing too, I think the fact that your children could stay on Obamacare until they're 26 has created an innovative and entrepreneurial young crowd. They don't have to, really worry about where they're going to get their health care. They have the ability to really go out there and try new things and take risks and know that they're going to be covered and use their entrepreneurial spirit.
Absolutely. So in Virginia, what are you guys going to do? Are you going to focus on the Northern Virginia? People always say you can't get Virginia if you don't do really, really big in Northern Virginia. So in our last, 50 seconds here, how much are you going to focus Northern Virginia versus the rest?
Well, we are going to focus all over the state, I have to tell you, because in the Democratic Party, there are delegates spread across the state. So we have to be everywhere. We have to be really focused on trying to get our people out all over the state, particularly in Northern Virginia, where I think people know her. She's made a couple of trips up here in the last couple of months, so it's very, very important to be all over the state.
All right. Well, people who want more information should go to hillaryclinton.com. And I know you can sign up and do all kinds of things there. I want to thank you, Kris, for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you, Bettina. I appreciate it.
Good luck, and we'll see what happens after March 1st.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.